Mr. Oosting, thank you for being available today. I take it you monitored the committee's previous hearing where GetUp was represented by Mr. Idris and Mr. Blake, is that right?
Yes, and our First Nations Justice Campaign Director, Larissa Baldwin.
What was so important that you could take the time to monitor it but not represent GetUp, given you're the most senior official within the organisation?
Well, in our submission to the committee, we put forward a number of democratic and electoral reforms that we wanted the committee to consider. We sort of saw that as, I guess, the purpose of these hearings, and that's why we focused both our submission and the expert witnesses that we put forward, people that could speak to the experience on the ground around issues of voting and enrolment, and the sort of reforms that we've looked at in terms of their issue area expertise and who carry that work within GetUp, but happy to be here today.
Mr. Oosting, I take it you reviewed Ms Flint's evidence later in the day where she detailed how Dave Walsh, the Boothby stalker, and GetUp worked hand in glove. Your comment about that?
Well, as my colleague said in the last committee hearing, there's been no evidence as to GetUp working hand in glove with that individual.
That's not true, is it, Mr. Oosting? Mr. Oosting, David Walsh had extensive links to GetUp's SA Action Network, didn't he?
David Walsh was not a GetUp member. There is not evidence as you've characterised it, and look, we strongly condemned the sorts of behaviour that were characterised by the member for Boothby at the time. And as my colleagues pointed previously, we absolutely had no involvement, and there's certainly been no suggestion by local authorities who looked into this matter that we did. So we're 100% confident there was absolutely no involvement at the time. On the 16th of May, in the lead up to the election, when this issue was arising in the media, we released a statement that said we absolutely condemn this kind of behaviour. It's deplorable and not how election campaigns should be conducted. And the statement goes on to say that sexist bullying like this needs to be condemned by everyone. It is never okay. It degrades women and gender non-conforming people and makes it harder for them to stand in Parliament. So we made sure, as my colleagues previously who appeared pointed out, that we had absolutely no involvement at all. We're confident of that. We condemn these behaviours where they occurred across the political spectrum.
Well, Mr. Oosting, let's go to the concept of bird dogging. Now, I'm going to assume a level of knowledge on your behalf in relation to bird dogging. That's a technique, of course, that's designed to instill fear and anxiety in the mind of a candidate so as to make the candidature uncomfortable. Mr. Oosting, did you personally tick off on the use of bird dogging as a legitimate campaign strategy endorsed by GetUp?
Well, look, I don't at all accept the characterisation that you've made there.
Well, how do you define bird dogging, Mr. Oosting?
Look,
Sorry.
Well, look. In my experience, it's an opportunity to raise some of the issues that often don't get picked up. For instance, I attended a press event with Peter Coombs, the singer and songwriter, to perform a song about climate change. We had Bananas in Pyjamas B1 and B2 at a number of media events. So these were opportunities to raise issues of climate change, funding of the public broadcasters, and that's our intent, to get issues.
But Mr. Oosting, let's talk frankly. Let's talk frankly, Mr. Oosting. That's not examples of bird dogging. Bird dogging is the campaign technique to make the exercise of being a candidate uncomfortable, so as to limit the aptitude of a candidate to be in public. And Mr. Oosting,
I absolutely reject that, with all due respect. And if that's your characterisation, that's yours. That's certainly not at all how we would approach it.
With respect, Mr. Oosting, that's the internationally accepted understanding. Now, let's move on.
I don't think that's the case, Mr. Basson.
Well, that's rubbish. Is bird dogging still included in the GetUp training and other volunteer resources that you provide to volunteers?
Look, our focus was not on bird dogging in 2019, and it hasn't been since.
Was it included in your training manual?
It was it was last year. That's correct.
Is it still included in your training manual?
Look, we have I think those training manuals are still on our website, so it's there.
So it is still part of your campaign technique as endorsed by GetUp?
Look, we're looking for opportunities to get the issues on the public radar. If that means, turning up to events with B1 and B2 or giant heads of Tony Abbott and Peter Dutton, as we did in 2019, then these can be ways of making sure that issues remain part of policy and public debates.
So I take it from that, Mr. Oosting, you don't take any responsibility for the consequences of the bird dog training that volunteers received and the actions that led directly to in respect of Ms. Flint and what she had to experience during the 2019 campaign?
Well, we looked closely into the situation in Boothby, and we're confident we had absolutely no involvement. And so I reject your characterisation wholly. We condemned the behaviour at the time. We continue to do so to this day. And that's something I think we all take very seriously. And so we appreciate where your question is coming from, but it's not correct and unfair to characterise that somehow GetUp was involved in those incidents.
But Mr. Oosting, Henrietta Smith, who launched the GetUp's campaign in Boothby, said, and I quote, "We're getting people razzed up with town hall meetings and getting people working in their neighbourhoods with limited oversight from us. It's low control from our headquarters." So on the one hand, you provide training in relation to what bird dogging is, that is to make the campaign experience uncomfortable for candidates, and then it's stand back, low control. Do you accept that these circumstances can occur, that people can take your training and go too far?
Well, that's certainly not the case. As I say, we looked into it. The person you raised, David Walsh, was not a GetUp member, was not part of our trainings, so it's simply untrue.
Mr. Oosting, were GetUp members counselled or the subject of disciplinary action as a result of bird dogging practices that occurred in 2019?
I might have a quick look, if that's okay, just to refresh my memory to see if there was anything like that, Mr. Passon. What I can say is that anyone who is a volunteer signs up to our volunteer code of conduct. The code of conduct says that GetUp does not tolerate racist, sexist, homophobic, ableist or ageist language or behaviour, harassment or bullying or intentional or unintentional breaches of the GetUp code of conduct and privacy policies. Nothing comes to mind that directly. I believe I'd have to check if anyone specifically was, as a result of how you've characterised it, as a result of some bird dogging tactics.
Now, given the media coverage that Ms. Flint's treatment attracted, did any board member at GetUp raise concerns around questions of bird dogging or other behaviour with respect to GetUp in that Boothby campaign?
Look, I think everybody was concerned at the incidents in Boothby and other places.
Did GetUp come out and condemn that action immediately?
Yeah, that's right. We as I mentioned, and we're happy to provide a copy of.
Did they reject the use of bird dogging, or, as you say, does it remain your current and endorsed campaign tactic?
Yeah, look, to answer your question, we took the issue very seriously in the incidents there, as we did across a range of places that occurred.
But it remains your endorsed campaign tactic, Mr. Oosting. I'm struggling to understand this.
Well, look, we've never endorsed and never would endorse the sorts of behaviour that occurred in Boothby. I think that's a deliberate mischaracterisation of what occurred in Boothby.
You provide training to individuals about how to successfully bird dog candidates. I can't be any clearer. Do you reject bird dogging as a legitimate campaign tool?
The statements and the incidents that we saw in relation to Boothby weren't characterised at the time, at least by the media, as bird dogging, and certainly I don't think would meet any reasonable person's definition of bird dogging. We conducted a review immediately. We take these incidents very seriously. We are 100% confident we had absolutely no involvement with those incidents that were characterised in the media as stalking and so forth. And then, and we're happy to provide this in copy to the committee. On the 16th of May, we released a statement that said, and I'll reread it, we absolutely condemn this kind of behaviour. It is deplorable and not how election campaigns should be conducted. Sexist bullying like this needs to be condemned by everyone. It is never okay. It degrades women and gender non-conforming people and makes it harder for them to stand in Parliament. I think we took strong and clear action there. We know that we weren't involved, but we still made sure it was informed publicly that we condemned those sorts of behaviour, just as we did in Flinders and Warringah and a range of other places where concerns were raised in the media.
Mr Oosting, that being said, will you commit today to end the practice of bird dogging, end the practice of training your volunteers around bird dogging, so as not to target female MPs, as you did in the Boothby campaign, irrespective of political persuasion? And if you don't, unwilling to commit to that, why not?
Well, I think you're, again, misleading both the public and the behaviour that we've set out that we conducted in Boothby. We did not, and I will continue to state, I've answered your question repeatedly, it's a mischaracterisation of what occurred in Boothby. It's certainly a mischaracterisation of GetUp's behaviour in Boothby. We had absolutely no involvement in those activities. We've stated this repeatedly. There's been absolutely no suggestion by local authority or others that GetUp had any involvement, and so I think that that's very clear. There is, and furthermore, we condemn those behaviours and still do. Nobody should be treated like this when standing for Parliament. Parliament should be something that's freely available to any individual to engage in, and that's something that it's all too clear we all need to seek to address, and that's why we released the strong statements at the time condemning that sort of behaviour.
And that statement was issued on the 16th of May.
That's correct, Senator.
Right.
Senator,
so that was 2 days before the election, after this type of behaviour had been going on for a considerable period of time.
We responded on the same day that these stories were emerging in the media. So there was an ABC article from ABC Adelaide, which details the incidents that were raised by the committee and obviously the media at the time. And so we released our statement that same day.
And can you give us a list to whom you sent that media release?
It was sent publicly. It's available on our Twitter account.
No, to whom you sent it is the question. Not whether you put it up on Twitter, but whether you sent it to media outlets specifically.
Look, it would have been sent to all the media outlets in
Sorry?
South Australia.
Sorry?
It would have been sent to all.
You say it would have been. I'm asking, was it? Please concentrate on the question asked. Was it sent to all media outlets? If so, please provide a list on notice to the committee of all those media outlets to which it was sent with verification.
Look, I'm confident we spoke to individuals. This was a story, I mean, I don't think the story actually made any mention of GetUp, but we did speak to the media contacts in South Australia at the time. And the purpose, if I could finish my statement, of releasing it on Twitter, of course, is that it's a platform that's widely used by journalists. It's in the public domain, so I'm confident that it was widely received by all journalists and media following this story.
Well, I've asked you to take a question on notice. Please do so and provide the details that are being sought. Now,
I mean, I don't think there's additional information we can provide. This is a widely available public
You said
statement.
you
It was
said
received by all journalists.
you said it was sent to all media outlets. When I asked you
Correct.
to
Correct,
provide,
it's available.
when I asked you to,
Correct, Senator. It's available on Twitter. and we're happy
if
to
you
provide that to
you asked me not to interrupt you, which is a fair thing, please don't interrupt me.
Apologies.
You indicated that it was this statement was sent to all media outlets. When I then asked you to provide a list, you are now denying us that. Is that correct?
No, I'm just pointing
Right.
out that we will provide it by Twitter.
In that case, if you're not denying it, can you please take it on notice and provide us with a list of all the media outlets to which it was sent? And if you can take that on notice, that would be exceptionally helpful to check the veracity of your initial statement. Now, can I ask whether GetUp appeared at Ms Flint's electorate office from time to time?
Look, we've gone through this exhaustively, Senator Betts, and we've made it clear, and there's certainly been no suggestion we're involved in the behaviours that your previous colleague have raised, and certainly been no suggestion by any local authorities or the like. Do we at times go to MPs' offices? Of course, they're public places.
All right. Can I ask again, very simple question. Did GetUp appear at Ms Flint's electorate office from time to time, uninvited during this campaign? The answer is either yes or no. Sorry?
Yeah, I suspect that would have been the case.
You suspect. As National Director, you would know whether it occurred, yes or no.
Look, yeah, I think it would have been the case, Senator.
You say you
I
think
was
it
not
would be the case. If you need to take it on notice, I'm sure you know, because you were listening in last time round but didn't make yourself available to answer these types of questions. Don't interrupt. And therefore, I'm now asking you to tell us whether you, who was the national organiser, knew about GetUp appearing at Ms Flint's electorate office.
Senator, I'm confident that at some point we would have been at the MP's office, as we would have been in most MP's offices across the country, in fact.
So, after all this, can we say the answer is yes?
Yeah, that's a fair characterisation of what I said originally.
No, it would have been a lot better if you would have just answered the question honestly without the obfuscation at the very beginning. But let's keep moving. And did GetUp seek to attend or stalk a private event that was not even advertised in Boothby?
Your characterisation there, I think, is misleading and untrue. Of course, we would never seek to stalk anybody.
All right, let me delete the word stalk. Did you attend a private-only, unadvertised function for Ms Flint in the seat of Boothby?
I can't speak to whether or not the event was private. I believe there are a range of organisations and media there, which was characterised by the MP in her presentation as I understood it. And yes, GetUp was present at that event.
Yeah, with a Peter Dutton head. Is that correct? Supplied by GetUp.
We had, a giant theatrical head of Peter Dutton and possibly also Tony Abbott, and I think B1 and B2. We were, as I mentioned earlier, our aim was to put issues of climate and the funding of public broadcasters as part of the debate of the election campaign.
And this is classic bird dogging, is it not?
I don't know if I would characterise it as bird dogging. I think this was, as I understood it, a widely attended event, and people often attend public events, media events, and so forth.
And private events that David Walsh himself confirmed or Dave Walsh confirmed that he was at private events, including one at Blackwood, and seems to have known, Mr Walsh seems to have known a lot about GetUp's involvement in the seat of Boothby.
I think what's probably important, Senator Roberts, is to know that most of the work that our members and volunteers do are available publicly. So if Mr Walsh, who we've said repeatedly was not a GetUp member, had nothing to do with anything we did, was following these publicly available events, he could have known. So it's nothing unusual. You could have known, really, what we were doing at every single one of our events had you have taken the time.
And Mr Walsh just happened to know about what GetUp was doing and was willing to Facebook post about these things, but not a member of GetUp, no interest in GetUp, just fortuitous that he did this.
Well, it's got nothing to do with... I can't speak to what Mr Walsh was doing. We've repeated ourselves a number of times. Mr Walsh was not a member. He was not involved in GetUp campaigning or any of its tactics. What he does would have been for him to respond to.
How do you determine membership of GetUp? If they've signed a petition or you're on your mailing list, how's that determined?
Yeah, correct. Through participation, people become members and engage in a range of different ways.
And you then email them, is that correct?
That's one of the activities, yes.
Yeah, and can you tell us whether Mr Walsh was ever emailed by GetUp?
The events that you're referring to are in the public domain. I think it's important to make clear.
No, just answer the question. Was Mr Dave Walsh ever emailed by GetUp, which, according to your evidence just given, is a test of membership?
Yeah, correct. He was not a GetUp member and so therefore would not have been emailed.
He would not have been emailed. Thank you for that. That's on the record.
Okay, could I just check a couple of things? In previous evidence before the committee, GetUp has represented that there is no links to members of the Australian Labor Party. Is that still your evidence?
Sorry, I wasn't able to catch the...
Look, I'll be more direct. Daniel Stone and Phil Ireland are members of your board, aren't they?
Correct.
And they have a long history and association with the Australian Labor Party. That's correct, isn't it? I can go through it if you like, but we can just accept that, can't we?
Look, I mean...
It's a yes or no, Mr Oosting. You know them well. It's a yes or no.
Yeah, I was seeking to answer your question. I think they have had those involvements as have arranged.
Did they raise any objection as members?
We encourage people should be open in a democratic society to be involved and share political views as they see fit.
Did they raise as board members any concern relating the technique of bird dogging, but either before it was adopted in the 2019 campaign, during the 2019 campaign, or subsequently?
Not to my recollection, no. This is we have had no involvement with the incidents that you outlined.
No, I'm not talking about the incidents. I'm now saying the concept of bird dogging, which you teach and train as part of your technique manual. Has Mr Stone or Mr Ireland raised objection to that concept of bird dogging as you train it?
No, I don't think so.
So to this point, it's very, very important, Mr Oosting, and I endorse what you said about the need to broad political involvement in these things. It's true to say, isn't it, that a future Conservative female candidate in a marginal or otherwise seat at the forthcoming federal election can expect to face bird dogging at the hands of GetUp operatives in those future campaigns. That's the case, isn't it? You're not resiling from bird dogging or it being a legitimate campaign technique, and female candidates with a Conservative background can expect to face that at the next federal election, can't they?
Well, as I stated earlier, we completely reject your characterisation of bird dogging. I think it's misleading and disingenuous, and it's not the sort of activities as you've characterised it that we've ever engaged in.
So you teach bird dogging, which is a hunting phrase about targeting targeting game and making the experience uncomfortable for the game, exhausting them, tiring them out, and making them therefore easier to kill. I'm not suggesting there's any plan to kill in relation to your approach to bird dogging, but the concept is the same, isn't it? It's to create a sense of fear, anxiety, concern, and to limit their efficacy as a candidate. That's true, isn't it?
No, that's not at all.
Well, what is bird dogging then? Why call it bird dogging and not simply active campaigning?
Well, I mean, I think that it is active campaigning, and
But you call it bird dogging.
Yeah.
You train it as bird dogging, Mr. Oosting.
I think I've answered your question a number of times.
With respect, you haven't on this topic.
I've provided you with tangible examples of how I characterise bird dogging and how we can only give you an honest answer. We can only give you facts. You will continue to mislead and try and set about.
Be very careful, Mr. Oosting. The suggestion that I'm misleading this committee or this place is a very serious allegation. Mate,
I think
Mr. Oosting, if you can answer this
mischaracterised.
question for me, and I just want to be clear, future candidates can expect to face the same sort of campaign courtesy of GetUp that Nicole Flint faced in 2019. That's your evidence, isn't it?
Look, well, I think we've made our answers to this abundantly clear. GetUp condemned the behaviours that were raised by Nicole Flint at the time. We continue to condemn it to this day. As we mentioned in our statement in May, we condemn this kind of behaviour that she received and was part of her testimony and submission to this committee. It was deplorable and not how election campaigns should be conducted. Sexist bullying like this needs to be condemned by everyone. It's never okay. It degrades women and gender non-conforming people and makes it harder for them to stand in Parliament.
Now, that was a statement you issued in relation to Mr. Excuse me, Mr. Oosting. That was a statement you issued in relation to Mr. Bunny, the person who was charged with stalking Georgina Downer. It wasn't a statement issued in relation to the Boothby campaign or Mr. Walsh, is it?
No, this was a statement in relation
what?
to ABC Adelaide media reports for Liberal MP Nicole Flint. That was the title of the media, the articles at the time was Liberal MP Nicole Flint has been targeted by disgraceful and shameful, etc.
Chair, could I just raise a very quick point here? I was always of the view in the evidence that Mr. Oosting was giving in relation to Mr. Walsh that the statement that was being read out related to Mr. Walsh's behaviour. It's now only because of the forensic cross-examination of Mr. Passon that we get to hear that it wasn't related to Mr. Walsh but Mr. Bunny. I treat that very seriously, but look, back to Mr. Passon, but
So
please be careful with your evidence.
Just to round out, Mr. Oosting, it's your evidence that whilst you condemn the actions that Ms. Flint faced, you endorse and indeed intend to continue to use the practice of bird dogging. Can I just ask you this question? And I'm sorry if it is somewhat personal of nature, but Mr. Oosting, put yourself in the shoes of Nicole Flint, a single woman running in a marginal seat, facing a very strong challenge. Would you, in that circumstance, appreciate being bird dogged at your place of business, at your home, where you gather with friends, and for it to sustain itself during the course of the campaign? Would you appreciate that behaviour, and do you think that's fair cut and thrust of a federal election campaign?
Well, as we've said, of course, we condemned it, and therefore, in that condemnation, we are very clearly stating we do not accept it and do not think it is acceptable. And I think what I'm hearing from the committee is that a lot more needs to be done in order to create the sort of space where women can stand for Parliament in a safe and acceptable way. That's something that we absolutely support those goals.
Well, Mr. Oosting, one of the first things that could happen is you could stop training people in the concept of bird dogging, because, with respect, this would operate as more of a disincentive for women to involve themselves in political campaigns, but individuals generally, than anything I've seen in 15 years in politics. So will you commit, consistent with your last statement, to end the practice of bird dogging, end the practice of teaching and training bird dogging, and condemn that activity going forward?
Look, as you've characterised bird dogging, that is not the sort of activities that GetUp engages in, and I think I've made that clear and answered your question.
But Mr Oosting, you've also said in evidence, or at least GetUp has, that you take a low supervision approach. So on the one hand, you weaponise individuals with an understanding of how to make campaigns uncomfortable for candidates, and then you step back and say, but we're not going to supervise you actively in the field. I mean, you have created this circumstance, and it's one which you should condemn. It's a technique you should condemn, but you don't. You endorse it, and you say you're going to use it in future campaigns and target members of Parliament, as you did Nicole Flint in 2019.
Look, I think it's wholly untrue and unfounded in fact to characterise that we created those circumstances.
So did you or did you not train GetUp volunteers in Boothby in the technique of bird dogging?
We didn't train people in bird dogging.
Sorry. I want to be clear about this, Mr Oosting. Your training materials say in black and white.
Correct. Yes.
And talk specifically. It's your language, not mine. So you say on the one hand you didn't train people in bird dogging, but it's in your training materials. Come on.
Yeah, I agree that it's in the training materials, but our focus in Boothby was on doing things like, making phone calls, trying to reach out to the public, holding public events.
That's not bird dogging. That's not bird dogging, Mr Oosting, and your attempts to recategorise it, quite frankly, are disingenuous.
I mean, bird dogging was not a focus of our campaigns. As we've talked about openly and widely publicly, our focus of our campaigns was reaching out to voters in electorates across the country, making phone calls, going door knocking. That's where our training efforts
But in a case where you had a vulnerable, single female candidate, you adopted bird dogging as your principal technique in that electorate, didn't you? And you trained for it.
Well, as you've characterised it, I think that it's misleading to the way that we engaged ourselves. We, as I mentioned, we had the giant heads, as you've pointed out, of Peter Dutton and I think Tony Abbott, and we had B1 and B2, and we had a range of sort of theatrical things to bring up the issues of public funding of broadcasters and climate change. Pardon me.
So it's a matter of complete coincidence, you say, that in the campaign where you engaged volunteers, where you trained them in the concept of bird dogging and the techniques, that's a complete coincidence that actually in that campaign we had an occasion of a female candidate being stalked by someone who was incredibly close to the GetUp SA network in South Australia. Complete coincidence, you say?
Well, we had absolutely no involvement, as we've made clear. We condemn those behaviours and will continue to condemn them wherever they occur across the political spectrum, as we did in a range of behaviours in seats right across the country, from Flinders to Warringah and many other places.
So when you say you condemned Mr Walsh's behaviour, does your statement specifically refer to Mr Walsh rather than Mr Bunny?
The statement that I read out to the committee, and we can provide...
I think you should. Thank you.
Follow-up is available publicly on our Twitter account. And it was in relation to an ABC Adelaide media article on the 16th of May, and it was in relation to MP Nicole Flint.
And Mr Bunny or Mr Walsh, which was the question? Not everything else.
I don't have that news article in front of me at the moment.
And how did you disseminate that? How did you disseminate that statement, Mr Oosting? Was it sent to all your 1.4 million volunteers?
There was no suggestion that GetUp was involved. We released the statement on Twitter, and I believe we made phone calls to the local media contacts in South Australia who had been covering the story.
So who was the GetUp leader in Boothby for the federal campaign?
Renair Jury.
Right. We might need to ask questions there. But look, Mr Edries knew that you were listening in at the last hearing. That's the case, is it not?
I gave evidence that he was not here, but he was...
No. I'm asking Mr Oosting. Mr Oosting.
I was distracted also.
No, Mr Edries knew that you were listening in to the last hearing. That could only be directed to you, Mr Oosting, but for clarity...
Sorry, I misheard what you said, Mr Roberts.
All right, Mr Oosting, you knew that Mr Edries...
Correct, yes.
Yes. So, Mr Edries, why did you have great difficulty in answering that question to us when I asked whether or not you were aware, or somebody asked, whether or not Mr Oosting was listening in?
I do believe I said I couldn't be certain what he was doing, but I knew he was not here in the room.
Yeah, but you knew. So why did you obfuscate?
With respect, Mr Abetz, you positing what I knew is not appropriate, but I told you what I had at the time, and my evidence at the time was true, and it will continue to be that.
Despite the fact that Mr Oosting has just given evidence that he knew, that you knew, that he was listening in. But look, let's move on.
Just to correct the record, I believe Mr Oosting said he was listening in to, but he could not possibly know what I was thinking at the time, which was the point I was trying to make.
That if Mr Oosting and you had had a discussion or knew that he would not make himself available but nevertheless listen in, it would be in the knowledge of both of you. One of you has given evidence as to that knowledge. You, Mr Edries, regrettably have obfuscated. But look, time is short. Let's move on. Mr Edries confirmed at the last hearing in September the GetUp, through your decision-making, Mr Oosting, employed a number of senior organisers who were dispatched around the country to direct campaigns in particular seats. You wouldn't seek to alter that evidence, Mr Oosting?
No, that's correct.
Thank you. Now, did these senior organisers that were dispatched around the country include Jake Wishart?
Yes, Jack was one of our staff during the campaign.
Yeah, was he dispatched to somewhere in the country? If so, where?
Jake, I think, is from Melbourne and worked within Melbourne and spent some time in the electorate of Flinders, I believe.
All right, what about Sean Murray? He was
yes,
similarly employed?
Yes, Sean was. I think we've already addressed these questions on notice, but to go back over it, yep, Sean was a staff member of GetUp during the 2019 election campaign.
As was Alessandro Moliterno and Billy Marshall.
Correct.
And was bird dogging part of their job? And organising bird dogging?
Look, as we've gone over the bird dogging in terms of raising issues in a theatrical way was a part of our campaign. We had giant costume heads of Peter Dutton and Tony Abbott, and raising issues of climate change and a range of other issues and causes.
Yes. What about bird dogging? Only question, not about everything else, but bird dogging, which you so studiously sought to avoid with my friend and colleague, Mr Passon. I'm only asking about bird dogging. Was part of their job
I was responding to bird dogging, and your colleague was mischaracterising, in my view, what is meant by that, and that's why I was at pains to outline what it means in reality.
Well, you have it defined, courtesy of the links on GetUp's website, what bird dogging is, so we can go back to that if need be. But excuse me, Mr Oosting, excuse me, was bird dogging part of their job? Wishart, Murray, Moliterno, Marshall, and I think the other four that you confirmed on notice.
As we've confirmed previously, that was one of the range of ways in terms of raising, the issues in a theatrical way that get engaged in the 2019 election campaign.
So bird dogging was part of their job.
Yeah, correct. It was part of the organisation.
So it's very easy if you simply ask the question and saves a lot of time. So would you agree that organising a church invasion, using a surveillance van, circling the electorate spying on another campaign, or disrupting a press conference while dressed as a squid might be determined to be or described as bird dogging?
So, sorry, the question is, would that be...
Yeah, organising the church invasion at a candidates forum, using a surveillance van, circling the electorate spying on a campaign, disrupting a press conference while dressed as a squid. Are these the sort of activities that could rightfully be described as bird dogging?
Well, I don't think it's true or accurate to describe it as a church invasion. I think that's inaccurate and misleading. But the giant squids.
What do you mean?
Might be a way to raise
misleading?
the issues of climate change or
No.
threats to the
Let's
Great
not
Barrier Reef.
worry about what the issue you were trying to promote. I'm just talking about the activity is organising the church invasion of a candidates forum, and ignore the term church, be it a town hall invasion at a candidates forum, or surveilling, or disrupting a press conference dressed as a squid. All that is classic bird dogging, is it not?
Look, I don't accept the premise that there was some sort of invasion.
I have not made that allegation. I'm just putting to you certain activities that might be described as bird dogging, and you are exceptionally defensive because I think you know certain activities that GetUp may have been involved in, and I might be getting to specifics later, but I'm only asking in generalities at this time. And it fits in with bird dogging, doesn't it? Invading a candidates forum, using a surveillance van to get round an electorate, or disrupting a press conference dressed as a squid. That is classic bird dogging, is it not?
I don't accept the way that you're characterising the use of the word invasion as what I was responding to, Senator Roberts.
Well, you know that Jake Wishart organised that at the candidates forum in Flinders, Mr Marshall in Dixon with a GetUp surveillance van, and Alessandro Moliterno disrupting Dave Sharma's press conference whilst dressed as a squid. Now, moving on, these guys, Jake Wishart, Alessandro Moliterno, and yourself, were you ever captured giving the raised fist salute with Moliterno still in his squid outfit, celebrating the Wentworth by-election?
Sorry, I missed the beginning of your question there. Did you say was I?
Yeah, in a picture with Wishart and Moliterno with raised fists saluting the Wentworth by-election result with Moliterno in a squid outfit.
Was I personally?
Yes.
Is that the question?
Yes.
Oh, right. Not that I recall.
Not
it's
that you...
possible.
All right. All right, you don't recall. Interesting you don't, but let's move on. Can I then ask quickly, because time is short, and I want to give you a photograph on notice for you to look at. Is that available per chance to be put up now or not? If not, we will do that on notice. But you would be aware of the Australian Electoral Commissioner's evidence to the Senate completely countering the false submission that you've made to this committee. The AEC ruled in GetUp's favour as recently as February this year, specifically finding GetUp campaigns are 100% issues-based. The Electoral Commission never found that, did it?
Well, Senator, GetUp's GetUp's reputation and our independence, our the way that we engage in campaigns has been misrepresented by yourself to the AEC. I think I had a quick Google yesterday afternoon before appearing here.
Can you
going back to
please answer the question?
2005.
Sorry to interrupt. This is not about you making assertions. This is about you putting in effect on oath to this committee that the AEC specifically found GetUp campaigns are 100% issues-based, the GetUp plays an important role on election day, the GetUp is non-partisan. All these matters have been specifically refuted by the Australian Electoral Commissioner, not once, but twice. What have you done to correct the record to this committee, to your membership and to the public at large?
Well, Senator, I think it is relevant actually, because on Hansard you have continued on a number of occasions since 2005 to misrepresent GetUp, to claim that we're not independent, that we're somehow partisan.
No. Don't worry about my misrepresentations. Sorry, Mr. Oosting. You have to answer the question. It is not about me. It is the question is about your misrepresentation of the Australian Electoral Commission, which is an independent statutory authority, and you seek to clothe your organisation with credibility, putting words into the Electoral Commission's mouth, which they specifically refuted, not once, but twice. What have you done to correct the public record?
Well, following a number of misrepresentations made by yourself, Senator Abetz, we have written to the AEC, Tom Rogers, in September of 2020, and I'm happy to read that in here.
Or can you table that for the committee and present that to the committee?
Yeah, I'll read it in now. GetUp representatives were questioned about GetUp's use of wording in submission to the committee by Senator Abetz, including the AEC's investigated GetUp 3 times and single times has confirmed our independence. We, as mentioned in the email, the 25th of October 2019, GetUp agrees that this is technically not correct, but that rather the Electoral Commission was unable to find on those occasions that GetUp is an associated entity of those parties. And so in our submission, we have sought to make sure that the public are aware that the statements that you've made in Parliament claiming that GetUp is not independent or somehow partisan and that we should be found to be an associated entity are untrue. The Electoral Commission looked into the matter of whether or not an associated entity, which
for the purposes of this argument, Mr. Oosting, let's just pretend that everything I say is untrue. How is that in any way, shape or form relevant to your deliberate mischaracterisation of the independent statutory authority known as the Australian Electoral Commission, which has said not once but twice, in effect under oath to parliamentary committees, that your representations of them are false? I might be the worst person in the world. That does not exculpate you from the egregious misrepresentation of the independent Australian Electoral Commission. Can you show us in any way, shape or form where the Australian Electoral Commission has, to quote your words, made a specific finding that GetUp campaigns are 100% issues-based, or that GetUp plays an important role on election day, or GetUp is non-partisan? Are you able to give us any examples?
Examples of what? Sorry, Senator?
I know you're not that obtuse, but I will repeat the question for you. Can you provide us any evidence, any shred of evidence, where the Australian Electoral Commission has specifically found that GetUp campaigns are 100% issues-based, that GetUp plays an important role on election day, that GetUp is non-partisan?
Well, as I mentioned, it was established by yourself and others that somehow the associated entity definition was going to be a test to get up independence.
This is irrelevant, Mr. Oosting. Answer the question. Answer the question. What I may or may not have said is irrelevant. You have sought to assert that the Australian Electoral Commission has made specific findings in relation to GetUp, matters which the Australian Electoral Commission has specifically refuted, not once, but twice. So I'm now asking you for your evidence for these assertions, and if, as is clear by your obfuscation, you cannot provide that evidence, could I invite you, one, to correct the public record for this egregious misrepresentation of the Electoral Commission and consider your future and resign?
Well, I think there's two quick points that I would make. We have written to the AEC and have endeavoured, as we outlined to them, to be very clear about the legal definitions and the particular legal test that is...
But where's the evidence for your statements? Where's the evidence?
And we're happy to table that with the committee following this hearing today. I've read in that letter. As I say, we said to them that we would endeavour to ensure that we were very clear with the definition of the associated entity test. We are confident, obviously, 100% confident in GetUp's independence, and it has been found by the AEC that GetUp is not an associated entity or affiliated with any political party.
How does that in any way, shape or form answer my questions as to your egregious misrepresentation of the Australian Electoral Commission, which it has specifically refuted, not once but twice? Where is the evidence?
Well, look, in terms of evidence, as I say, we're happy to provide our letter to the AEC.
No, that's not evidence. Your letter cannot be evidence as to what you assert the AEC has said about you. It must be statements made by the AEC about you on which you rely on in this false document, I suggest, and I want to know where you got that evidence from. I think it was out of thin air, it's been fabricated, it's been refuted by the Electoral Commission, and that is why you ought to do the decent thing, correct the public record, consider your position, Mr Oosting, do the decent thing and resign. And Chair, if the committee were so minded, I think Mr Oosting and GetUp should be called again because time is running out.
Thank you, Senator.